Using basic fantasy to create superheroes by hacking the OSR. Why? Why not? Back around 1985, I was in danger of losing one of my best D&D players to the Satanic Panic, so I asked him to ask his parents what they thought of superheroes, and they were fine with it, so I ran to my nearest hobby shop and got my hands on the box set of Villains and Vigilantes, mostly because of the Jeff D art all over the box, but it was also on sale for half off, so I couldn't pass that up. What followed was about a 2-year campaign before we all got day jobs and went off to college, and you know how that goes. A few years ago, my friend Glenn, who was a freelance writer for Palladium Books, decided to run a World War II campaign using Heroes Unlimited. Glenn has written the Byzantium and the Northern Islands sourcebook and a ton of stuff for Rifters. Now, Heroes Unlimited isn't exactly my favorite superhero game. For starters, it has an antiquated skill system that I don't think has been updated since the 80s. But when he told me his plans, I was all in. Using the skills from Dead Rain, modified for the era, he strung together every World War II era module from every game system he could possibly find. The campaign lasted about 6 months, and it was probably the most fun I ever had playing Heroes Unlimited. I still chuckle about the time my character, the Human Dynamo, showed a tank full of Nazis how well metal conducts electricity. Not long after that, a bunch of us started playing Mighty Protectors, the updated version of Villains and Vigilantes. It's a much more streamlined version of V&V and a lot of fun. I said all that to say this. I love superheroes. I've been reading comics since before I could even read, if that makes any sense. One of my favorite things to do in junior high was to hack the BX rules to create superheroes. My best friend Steve and I would use information we found in the Handbook to the Marvel Universe series to create supervillains, then pit our characters against them. So in the spirit of all this reminiscing, I thought it would be fun to hack basic fantasy like we used to with BX. As many of you know, the basic fantasy role-playing game is my go-to OSR system. If you don't play basic fantasy, pretty much any retro clone will work. Also, why aren't you playing basic fantasy? The PDF versions of all the books are free to download, so that right there is reason enough. But what do I mean by hack? The beauty of D&D, and the OSR in general, is the modular nature of the system. You can pick and choose which rules you want to keep, which ones you want to get rid of, and import rules from other game systems and assimilate them into your new system. For instance, my game, Under a Gibbous Moon, is a pulp-based horror game that takes place in the 1920s. It's built around the OSR, but with aspects of other games, books, and movies that I like to create my own thing. But for the purpose of this video, I thought I would hack basic fantasy to create one of my all-time favorite superhero teams, and one most people would recognize, the Fantastic Four. First up, Benjamin J. Grimm, better known as the Thing. Armor class is 17, which if you consider his dex bonus, it's probably 18, because in his power set, I gave him the natural Stone Golem armor, which would make it a 17, and I thought, well, if I'm using the Stone Golem as an example, as a basis for his powers, maybe go ahead and give him Stone Giant Strength and the Stone Giant Constitution. Well, I couldn't find stats for Stone Golems or Golems in general anywhere in my basic fantasy books, so if somebody out there has knowledge of where I could find them, let me know in the comments. Well, I crept over to 5th edition and looked up their stats, because they've got stats for everything from a mosquito to a dinosaur, so I figured I could find what I wanted, and they're more or less comparable. A Stone Golem in 5th edition has a strength of 22 and a constitution of 20, so I went ahead and added those, which gives him the +4 bonus in both strength and constitution. And since I based him on a Stone Golem, I thought, well, I'm going to give him Stone Golem damage, but because Stone Golems are 9 feet tall, and the Thing is about 6 feet tall, I dropped his damage down a die type. And finally, I tacked on protection from normal missiles, because you're always seeing him get shot with bullets that bounce off, or grenades blowing up in his hand and don't do any damage, from shrapnel, stuff like that. Now, things like energy attacks, dragon breath, poison gas, stuff like that would still affect him. Up next is Johnny Storm, better known as the Human Torch. For his powers, basically what I came up with was a fiery attack, which is throwing little mini fireballs. But instead of basing them on the fireball spell, I based them on the damage that, like, say, a magic missile would do. You can either have them hit unerringly the way magic missile do, or he has to attack with a ranged attack, or they have to save, however you wanted to work it out. Personally, I would just have him attack and have the other person save for damage. Maybe cut the damage in half if they save. By using Magic Missile, as he goes up in levels, he would get more times per round that he could throw his little fireballs. The idea being he gets better at it, and his power level gets higher as he gets stronger and more experienced. And because his body is engulfed in flames, I gave him Wall of Fire, but instead of being able to manipulate it and move it and project it, it covers his body. And anything that touches the flames would take D4 damage, which I based on one of the damages for Wall of Fire. And it also gives him protection from normal missiles because arrows, bullets, ice storms, whatever you want to throw at him would most likely melt. But anything like gas attacks, lightning, energy attacks, that kind of thing would potentially do damage to him. Flight should go without saying, just use the flight spell for that. Now, because the Human Torch and the Invisible Girl, who I'll get to here in just a minute, have to activate their powers or project their powers, you might want to give them some kind of power activation save. So what I do is on a D20, 10 or higher, they can activate their power. And you use whatever one of their attributes would fuel their power. Like in Johnny's case, his Constitution would probably, so you can add the +1 bonus to that roll. In Sue's case, because it's telekinesis and stuff like that, that obviously comes from the mind, so you could use her intelligence bonus for that. Finally, I came up with an idea for their uniforms, because their uniforms are made of something called unstable molecules, which are tougher than normal material because they can withstand their power. Like when Human Torch puts out his flame, he's not buck naked because he didn't burn off all of his clothes while he transformed. So I thought, well, if it can do that, maybe it's got a natural armor class, so I gave it the armor class of leather. And next we have Susan Storm, better known as the Invisible Girl, later the Invisible Woman, but for the purpose of this video, she's the Invisible Girl. As her name would imply, her power is invisibility, basically like the spell. She can turn herself invisible, things she touches, she can turn invisible. If she attacks anything, she turns visible, basically just like the spell. Now, she didn't develop her force field powers till much later in the series, but I thought she's got to have something, otherwise she's just invisible and completely helpless. So what I did was I gave her the shield spell power. You know, it's an invisible barrier between you and the enemy. So it gives her the +3 versus melee, +6 versus missile, and it negates targeted energy attacks like energy beams, flame, that kind of thing. Now you'll notice I made her a thief because in the old days she was always sneaking around doing stuff invisibly. So I thought, give her the thieves' abilities to kind of give her something to do more than just get captured and fawn over the Submariner. And lastly, we have Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic himself, which is one of the funniest names for a superhero there ever was, but it fits his ego. I honestly had to make him from scratch because I couldn't really find anything in any of my books that would emulate his powers. But if you know of anything, a creature or a spell or anything like that would work better than what I've got, feel free to put it in the comments. Like the rest of the Fantastic Four, back in the early days, he wasn't nearly as stretchy, couldn't change into objects. You know, sometimes he made a rudimentary parachute, but that was about it. So I thought I'd give him some kind of stretching powers. So with stretching powers, basically, he can stretch 50 feet per limb, so he could do a grand total of 100 feet if he was stretching up to do something, or could stretch his arms in 50 feet in either direction. You know, his rubbery physical nature gives him the protection from normal missiles. Stuff's always bouncing off of him. And his uniform is the same as the rest of them with the leather properties. Reed's true power is his mind. He's constantly inventing the most cockamamie, wacky, impossible devices. So I came up with a power called Genius. And basically what that does is, at first level, if he wants to invent something, he makes like a inventing save on a D20 with his intelligence bonus and a D4 bonus against whatever difficulty challenge the GM wants to throw at him. I'm a big fan of difficulty challenges. I've been using them since I was playing Deadlands years ago, and now I see other games use it as well. So, you know, for anywhere from like 5 to 20 plus, whatever you want it to be, depending on what materials he has available and the time limit he has, the GM can set all that up. So he rolls against it. If he succeeds, then you come up with the amount of time it takes him to make the thing, and boom, he's made a cool invention. Basically, he starts at a D4, but probably by like 4th level, you could have it be where he ups the die type so that every 4 levels, his die type goes up as he gets better at what he does. You can cap it wherever you want, like maybe a D8 or a D12. Now, something I borrowed from Ben Milton's game Nave is the idea that as you advance in levels, you get 3 points to distribute amongst your attributes. That way your attributes aren't static. That's one problem I always had with a lot of RPGs was once you roll your stats, those are the ones you have, unless something comes along that alters them. When I was discussing this idea with my friend Mike Indovina, creator of Argonauts Odyssey, he wanted me to make Herbie. Mercifully, Herbie didn't come along till much later in the series, and since I'm making the original characters, I can dodge that bullet. So there you have it. I'm not going to deal with saving throws because a GM can basically look at these saving throws and go, okay, well, poison and paralysis is always going to be poison and paralysis. Dragon breath is always fire or electricity, whatever you want to make it. So the GM can kind of determine which one of these saving throws applies when they're throwing foes at your characters. Some of you are probably asking, what's the point of all this? And my answer is, what's the point to anything we do in this hobby? It's fun. But those are just my thoughts. What are some of yours? Do you ever hack existing systems to create something new? While I was creating these characters, I came up with a plot where the Fantastic Four had to confront the Mole Man on Monster Isle, so I could pull all kinds of weird subterranean monsters out and throw them at my players. What are some of the things you've done? Would you like to see more videos like this? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, don't forget to do all the YouTubey things, like comment, subscribe. Don't forget to hit that little bell icon so you don't miss a single video. Thanks for watching.